The town of Blackwood Inlet did not welcome visitors. It tolerated them. The air was perpetually thick, less a mist and more a low-hanging, saturated shawl that muffled sound and clung to the skin like a shroud. It smelled of brine, damp pine, and a faint, unsettling mineral decay that only locals seemed to ignore. Perched on the ragged coastline of New England, Blackwood Inlet existed in the shadow of two geographical tyrants. The impenetrable, centuries-old coniferous forest known as the Blackwood, and the vast, black eye of the region, the Abyss Lake. The lake was the problem. It wasn't a placid, tourist-friendly body of water. It was a geological scar, impossibly deep, cold enough to kill a man in minutes, and shrouded in legends the locals did not share with outsiders. For generations, the Abyss Lake had been greedy, swallowing fishing skiffs, drowning reckless teenagers, and hosting a steady trickle of disappearances that the state police eventually stopped investigating in earnest. They simply labeled them accidental drownings or runaways. But the people of Blackwood Inlet knew better. They knew about the silent diver. In the small, weathered house of the Thorne family, the suffocating atmosphere outside was mirrored by the tension within. Elias Thorne, a man whose hands were still shaped by the rigid certainty of military service, stood at the kitchen window, watching the gray world outside. A former Marine raider, Elias dealt in hard logic and visible threats. He believed in bullet trajectories, counter-surveillance, and the iron certainty of the laws of physics. That certainty was now his greatest weakness. "We can't stay, Elias. Not another night." Serafina's voice was a ragged whisper, not of fear, but of absolute, bone-deep conviction. She wasn't scrubbing a stain that wasn't there like some nervously neat homemaker. She was aggressively polishing the deadbolt on the back door with a cloth, her movements desperate and precise. The lock was already shining steel, but she worked as if trying to wear the metal down to its core. "Serafina, look at me." Elias turned, his face a mask of weary patience. "I know what the sheriff is saying. I know what the locals whisper. But the lake is the lake. People drown. They always have. Panic isn't strategy. This isn't drowning, Elias. This is intelligent." She finally stopped polishing, her pale eyes wide and fixed. "Last night, I found this." She placed an object on the antique, scarred kitchen table. It wasn't a misplaced salt shaker or a crooked picture frame. It was a small, tightly rolled scroll of parchment tied with a piece of dried, black algae. Elias unrolled it. It wasn't a joke or a threat written in English. The parchment was brittle, covered in complex, swirling symbols that seemed half alphabet, half diagram. They were not modern, not Latin, and certainly not Native American in origin. They looked like etchings found on the walls of submerged ruins. "What the hell is this?" Elias frowned, rotating the document. "Where did you find it?" It was tucked into the windowsill of Caleb's bedroom, facing the lake. Serafina leaned in, pointing to a recurring symbol, a jagged, inverted trident, crowned by 3 small circles. "They're coming for us. They're marking us. This is how they announce the hunt." Elias sighed, running a hand over the short, practical cut of his hair. "Sarah, this is nonsense. Some prank. Some old fisherman's kid trying to scare the newcomers. It looks like bad graffiti." The sheriff closed off the lower roads. "They found Bethany's rowboat yesterday, empty, 20 miles down the coast. And the fisherman, old Mr. Hemlock, who went out on Tuesday. His boat was fine. The engine was cold, the nets were full, and the coffee pot was still warm. But Mr. Hemlock was gone. And a week before that, the body they found by the tidal flats, the poor man from Portland, his ribs, they weren't broken. They were peeled back, Elias, like someone was looking inside." Her voice broke on the last word. "They don't just kill. They harvest." Elias felt the familiar hardening in his gut, the psychological armor he used against the irrational. "Then let me call Gareth. Let me call the state police. We'll establish a patrol. We'll set up a perimeter." "A perimeter won't stop something that lives in the deepest black water and knows how to open a deadbolt," Serafina retorted, her eyes flashing. A marine perimeter is for men with rifles and flesh and blood. This thing is something else. It knows the terrain better than we know our own skin. Their argument was cut short by a sound that instantly chilled the already cold air. Lila, their 6-year-old, singing from the adjacent living room. Lila was a silent child, often found in a quiet corner with her companion. A worn, threadbare rag doll named Doll, whose button eyes had long since gone missing, leaving 2 dark, empty sockets. Lila didn't sing standard nursery rhymes. Down where the dark is long and deep, the diver keeps a silent sleep. He waits for the warm, he waits for the bright, to take them back beneath the light. The melody was high, flat, and unervingly familiar. A sea shanty or a child's folk song from a long-forgotten era. Elias walked swiftly to the doorway, leaning against the frame as his wife had done just hours earlier. Lila sat cross-legged on the faded Persian rug, the empty-eyed doll propped against her knee. She swayed slightly as she sang, tracing the patterns on the rug with a detached focus. "Lila, honey, where did you learn that song?" Elias asked, keeping his voice carefully level and soft. Lila looked up, her expression utterly blank. "Doll taught me." She heard the water breathing, "Papa. And the diver knows our names now." She held up the doll. The fabric of the doll's chest was not stained with dirt, but with a fine, dark silt that smelled exactly like the algae on Serafina's parchment. That was the breaking point. It was one thing to dismiss a superstitious town or a panicked wife. It was another to watch his daughter parrot the terror. Elias finally saw not panic in Serafina's eyes, but foresight. "All right," Elias said, his voice flat with forced control. "We leave. Now. We take what fits in the truck and we drive until we hit a city with streetlights and no tide." Serafina let out a shuddering breath, the tension leaving her body only to be replaced by a frantic energy. "The spine trail. We have to take the spine trail. It's the quickest route to the county highway." The spine trail was a coastal road, narrow and treacherous, that wound around the highest cliffs of Blackwood Inlet, a dizzying ribbon of asphalt carved into rock. It was the fastest way out, but locals avoided it after sunset due to the fog and its proximity to the Abyss Lake's deeper inlets. "The spine trail it is," Elias confirmed, already moving toward the locked gun safe. "Grab the essentials. Don't worry about clothes. We just need to drive." The preparations were swift, efficient, and permeated with a desperate urgency. Serafina moved with the methodical precision of a surgeon, folding small piles of clothes and zipping the children's inhalers and medication into a clear bag. She paused only once, scribbling down a single, cramped sentence on a notepad. "Do not stop for any reason." She tore it off and taped it to the dashboard. Caleb, caught between fear and the thrill of an unexpected road trip, jammed his heavy flashlight and a paperback survival guide into his pack. Lila, however, was quiet. She simply tucked the silent, empty-eyed doll under her arm and tied a thick nautical rope, a piece of utility line Elias used for anchoring, around the doll's waist, looping the excess around her own wrist. "So he can't take her, Papa?" she explained, her voice soft and disturbingly certain. Elias was loading the truck, a heavy, 4-wheel-drive pickup, with the last supplies when the phone rang. He ignored it, preferring the clean sound of the trunk latch clicking shut. He wanted no last-minute interruptions, no neighborly warnings that would drag them back into the quagmire of local panic. He simply wanted to drive. As they piled into the truck, Elias checked his own supplies. He had 2 items he trusted implicitly. His military-grade survival knife, its 8-inch blade heavy and reassuring in his palm, and a .45 pistol tucked securely into a holster beneath his seat. If it was human, he'd fight. If it was not, well, he'd find out. Serafina buckled the children tightly, her hands checking the straps twice for Lila, 3 times for Caleb. As Elias started the engine, she leaned forward and placed her palm on the dashboard, directly over her handwritten note. "Windows up, locks down, and if we hear anything at all calling from the dark," she mandated, her voice low and fierce, "we drive faster. We do not answer." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the narrow, asphalt ribbon leading into the darkness. The truck's tires crunched on the gravel, pulling them away from the house and into the omnipresent, cold fog of Blackwood Inlet. The air inside the cab immediately felt too warm, too close. The smell of the outdoors, that faint, unsettling decay, seemed to follow them, clinging to their clothes and hair. They drove in silence, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the soft, erratic click of the defroster. The streets thinned quickly. The tired, clapboard houses gave way to the encroaching darkness of the Blackwood forest on the left. On the right, the ground dropped away into the unseen expanse of the Abyss Lake. Elias took a right turn onto the infamous spine trail. The road immediately narrowed. It was a dizzying cliffside drive, hemmed in by sheer rock face on one side and a precipitous drop on the other, where a rusted, battered guardrail offered only token protection from the plunge below. The fog was worse here, swirling and licking at the headlights, turning the beams into dull, yellowish halos. They were maybe half a mile down the trail when Serafina suddenly gasped. "Stop the truck!" she hissed, pointing toward the windshield. Elias braked hard, his heart slamming against his ribs. What is it?" "The lights. Did you see that?" Serafina was trembling, pointing at the guardrail 50 yards ahead. Elias squinted. The fog had thinned slightly, and in the beam of their headlights, something was dangling from the rusted guardrail. It wasn't cloth or plastic. It looked like a small, intricate net, woven from the same black, dried algae that had been on Lila's doll and the scroll. It was a crude, dark tapestry, but it shimmered slightly with a wet sheen, like a spider's web freshly spun and waiting. "It's a net," Elias said, trying to rationalize. "Some kids. Some sick joke." "No," Serafina whispered. "It's a snare. It's a marker. They knew we'd take the fastest way out." Before Elias could argue, a sound cut through the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was profoundly unnatural. A high-pitched, metallic whine that seemed to originate not from the external world, but from the depths of the Abyss Lake itself. It vibrated through the chassis of the truck, into their teeth, and down into the marrow of their bones. The truck's dashboard lights flickered violently, once, twice, and then died. The engine sputtered, gave a brief, choking cough that sounded wet and distressed, and then fell utterly silent. The pickup, a symbol of Elias's physical control, was now nothing more than a 2-ton metal coffin. The only light left was the pale, sickly yellow glow from the fog-diffused headlights, which seemed to illuminate nothing but the algae snare waiting 50 yards ahead. Elias desperately turned the key. Nothing, not even a click. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel, swearing under his breath. "The EMP. It has to be an EMP pulse. Something high-powered. This isn't random, Serafina." Serafina didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on the black, empty eye sockets of Lila's doll, which was now propped against the window, seemingly observing the death of their vehicle. Lila began to hum the song again, softer this time, a lullaby for a broken engine. Elias threw his door open. "Stay here. Windows locked. I'm checking the engine bay. Then I'm calling Gareth." "No!" Serafina grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Don't go out there. You saw the snare. You heard the whine. They stopped us. We're sitting right over the deepest part of the lake. Elias, they're watching. We have no choice. I'm a Marine, Serafina. I fix problems. I don't sit here and sing lullabies about the goddamn monster," he roared, pulling his arm free. He stomped around to the front of the truck and popped the hood. The metal shrieked against the hinges, a discordant sound in the oppressive silence. He immediately grabbed his satellite phone, his last tether to the rational world, and swore violently. No bars. No signal. Blocked. Frustrated, Elias slammed the hood down. The bang echoed off the cliff face. He reached for his regular cell phone, knowing it was useless, and then his mind shifted. He couldn't call the sheriff. He could only call one person who had the knowledge, the access, and the local disregard for proper procedure to get them out fast. He pulled the satellite phone out again, using its dead screen as a reflective surface to scan his surroundings. He found a single, faint bar of service when he held the phone high, angled toward the sea. He quickly dialed the number he knew by heart. "Silas? It's Elias. I'm stuck on the spine trail, half a mile past the old lighthouse ruins. Engine's dead. Everything's dead. I need your rig and a tow now. Don't call the sheriff. Just come." He didn't wait for a reply, simply clicking the phone off, terrified of losing the fleeting signal. He walked back toward the cab, slipping his knife free from his belt, just in case. Serafina immediately rolled her window down an inch. "Silas? You called Silas Vane?" she hissed, her face contorted with shock and fury. "The sheriff explicitly warned us. He knows. You call the sheriff Elias, not an old boat mechanic. He's closer. He's got the winch. He can drag us out of here faster than Gareth can assemble a search party." Elias countered, his voice raw. "That's not the point. The point is the thing is out there. Gareth knows what it is. Silas only knows how to fix a rudder." They stood there, locked in their furious, low-voiced argument. Elias felt the familiar heat of anger rising, clouding his tactical judgment. He was so focused on the logic of the tow, the expediency of the escape, that he failed to notice the silence of the forest. The wind had died. Even the low, sucking sound of the lake seemed to hold its breath. Then it happened. Serafina was gesturing wildly, illustrating the sheriff's rules, when her words cut short. Her eyes widened, focusing on a spot just beyond Elias's shoulder, near the sheer rock face. Elias spun, knife raised. He saw nothing, only the dark, jagged rock face. "Elias! Behind you!" Serafina screamed, her voice tearing the silence. Elias pivoted back, raising his knife instinctively, but it was already too late. A dark mass shot across the narrow strip of asphalt. It moved with the speed and unnatural weight of a predatory animal, but its trajectory was too low, too fluid, too wrong. It was a blur of dark, dripping density, like a column of black brine given sudden, violent motive. Elias barely felt the impact. He heard only the wet, sickly smack as the mass collided with Serafina's body, which was standing half in, half out of the open truck door. 1 second, Serafina was there, furious, desperate, alive. The next, she was gone. The open door swung back with a sharp, hollow clang. The only evidence she had existed was the ragged, wet sound of gravel and frozen dirt skittering over the guardrail and down the impossible slope toward the lake. Elias's scream was a raw, animalistic sound, immediately swallowed by the heavy fog. He ran to the guardrail, shoving his knife back into his belt, his eyes darting wildly into the absolute blackness below. He saw nothing. Nothing but the pale, diffused reflection of the truck's headlights on the abyssal surface of the water, hundreds of feet below. From the cab, Caleb's desperate, high-pitched wail sliced through the air, followed by Lila's terrifyingly detached, rhythmic humming. Elias didn't think. He was a Marine. He was trained to respond to threats. He vaulted the guardrail, his heavy boots skidding immediately on the loose, icy scree. He scrambled down the cliff face, the scent of damp earth and rot filling his nostrils. "Serafina!" His voice was hoarse, desperate. It was devoured by the darkness. The slope was treacherous, steep enough to feel like a vertical drop. He braced himself against the scrub brush and dead roots, blindly descending toward the faint, metallic smell that always intensified near the lake. Copper and mud. He was halfway down when he heard the sound. Not a cry for help. Not a splash. It was a slow, deliberate groan. A low, rhythmic sound, like stone grinding against stone, immediately followed by the distinct, wet sound of heavy fabric dragging across jagged rock. Elias reached the bottom, a narrow, pebble-strewn beach where the abyss lake lapped softly. He spun in the half-light, his eyes scanning. The metallic smell was overwhelming here. Then he saw the movement. 50 feet to his left, at the very edge of the water, a shape was moving. It was hunched, excessively tall, and impossibly thin, like a suit draped over a collection of oversized, calcified sticks. It moved with a strange, gliding gait that defied the uneven terrain. and it was pulling something. Elias's flashlight beam, shaking violently in his hand, found the victim. Seraphina. She lay face down, her dark hair already plastered to the stones, one arm trailing limply behind her. The creature was pulling her with its left hand. The appendage was less a hand and more a cluster of long, white, chitinous claws that were deeply embedded in the thick fabric of her coat. The coat, and the flesh beneath, was tearing, leaving a dark, slick trail on the pale stones. The movement, that was what broke Elias. It wasn't the violence, but the utter disrespect. The creature moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, pulling Seraphina into the black water's embrace. It paused after every other step, an unnerving hitch in its rhythm, as if it were performing a macabre, waterlogged waltz. It was enjoying it. It was savoring the sheer, total humiliation of its prey. Elias roared, a deep, visceral sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and charged. He snapped the massive blade of his marine knife open with a metallic click that echoed too loudly in the hollow space. "Hey!" The creature stopped. It didn't turn its whole body. It simply craned its neck, a movement that felt too long and too slow, like a praying mantis observing a fly. The moonlight caught its face, and Elias's blood froze in his veins. The silent diver. It wasn't a fish or a man in a wetsuit or an animal. It was a pale, wet, vaguely humanoid nightmare. Its skin was translucent, almost gelatinous, and it had no hair, no nose, just two deep, black fissures where eyes should be. But its mouth was the worst. It was a gaping, permanent grin of needle-like teeth, extending horizontally across its face from ear to ear, giving it a look of utter, malevolent glee. The creature held the pose, its head tilted, its terrible, empty gaze fixed on Elias. And then it winked. The translucent eyelids snapped down and up, an act of such intentional, mocking intelligence that it shattered Elias's remaining sanity. Elias didn't stop. He screamed Seraphina's name and splashed into the bone-cold water, charging at the monstrosity with the knife raised high. He heard the splash of the lake swallowing his boots, then his thighs, and then he lost the ground beneath him. He was swimming, arms churning, driving himself toward the thing that had taken his wife. The silent diver simply waited, the grin widening in the half-light, the dark water already beginning to pull at Seraphina's legs. The abyss lake was a liquid void, colder and denser than any freshwater Elias Thorne had ever known. It instantly robbed the air from his lungs and the strength from his limbs. His charge, fueled by primal marine rage, ended almost immediately when he plunged past the shelf of rock and the ground vanished. The silent diver had anticipated his move. The last image Elias registered before the deep black swallowed him was the creature releasing Seraphina's coat, allowing her body to sink, only to then extend its other arm, impossibly long, skeletal, and ending in a razor-sharp ivory spike, and pierce his thigh, yanking him downwards. The pain was secondary to the chilling realization. The creature didn't want a quick kill. It wanted to collect them, intact. His knife plunged uselessly into the water where the diver had been, meeting only the indifferent, crushing pressure of the depths. In the truck cab, perched hundreds of feet above the scene, Caleb Thorne felt the world fracture. His father's primal scream, followed by the heavy, echoing splash, was a sound he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. He was a 10-year-old boy who read survival guides, but no manual had prepared him for the fact that his parents could simply be deleted from existence in less than 90 seconds. "Papa!" Caleb sobbed, his face pressed against the driver's side window, uselessly searching the dark, fog-choked slope. His hand fumbled for the .45 pistol he knew was holstered beneath the seat. He found the cold, heavy steel, but his fingers were too numb with shock to grip it properly. He had seen his father shoot bottles, but never a living thing, certainly not a thing that winked. Lila, strapped tightly in the back seat, did not cry. She only hummed, the chilling nursery rhyme acting as a bizarre, detached soundtrack to the tragedy. Her attention was not on the cliff face or the guardrail, but fixed on the passenger side window. She raised her small, trembling hand and pointed. "He's coming back for Doll," she whispered. Caleb followed her gaze. The The truck's headlights, though dim and hazy, created a small, visible pocket of space around the vehicle. The space was utterly empty, save for the swaying, dark algae snare hanging from the guardrail 50 yards up the trail. Then, a movement near the rock face, opposite the abyss lake. It wasn't the blur of the initial attack. This was slower, more deliberate. A dark, sleek head emerging from the shadows. The diver, having secured Elias and Serafina, was returning. It moved with an unnerving, fluid silence, its long limbs bending in ways that defied human anatomy. It was coated in fresh lake silt, shining faintly in the weak light, and it smelled powerfully of rotting metal and freezing mud. Caleb didn't need his father's rationale to understand. They were the next logical step in the hunt. "Lila, cover your eyes. Cover them now," Caleb shrieked, fumbling for his father's knife on the passenger seat, but finding nothing. He gripped the heavy flashlight in his lap. It was useless against this predator. The creature didn't rush. It seemed to survey the truck, recognizing its quarry was secured inside the metal shell. It moved toward the rear of the pickup, its movements suggesting not aggression, but curiosity, like a skilled fisherman inspecting a stubborn lure. It stopped right beside the passenger side door. Caleb watched, frozen, as one of the creature's razor-sharp claws slowly, gently, tapped the glass. It made no sound, just a visible ripple in the fog clinging to the window pane. Then the true horror began. The diver was not trying to smash the glass. It began to slide its claws along the seam of the window frame, mimicking the action of an experienced lockpicker. It was trying the locks. It knew how the mechanism worked. "It knows, Caleb. It knows how to open it," Lila shrieked, finally breaking her detached silence. She fumbled desperately with the nautical rope tied around her wrist and the doll. Tap, slide, press. The creature worked methodically, its body casting a long, skeletal shadow across the cabin. Just as Caleb realized the creature was about to successfully trip the internal lock, a sound of roaring, diesel salvation ripped through the night. The sound was Silas Vane's ancient, rust-bucket tow truck, a behemoth of patched steel and grinding gears that was louder than a freight train. The old captain didn't believe in silent arrivals. He drove his battered rig like a battering ram, its massive, custom-built winch cable rattling ominously on the spool. Silas braked 20 feet behind the Thorn's dead pickup, his headlights, far brighter than Elias's, cutting through the fog like twin spears. The sudden light and sound instantly startled the silent diver, which froze, turning its head quickly toward the source of the noise. Silas, a man whose face was a roadmap of seafaring and hard living, didn't bother with greetings. He didn't even turn off the engine. His first movement was to grab the 12-gauge shotgun mounted on the dash. Not Elias's .45, but a shotgun loaded with specialized salt rock rounds, and place it next to his seat. He then spotted the figure by the Thorn truck. Silas's eyes narrowed, instantly recognizing the familiar silhouette of the Abyss Lake's most persistent predator. He saw the black, dripping mass, the unervingly long arms, and the horrifying needle-toothed grin now aimed at him. Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed the largest tool he owned, a heavy, custom-forged iron monkey wrench, its handle wrapped in decaying leather, and burst out of the truck. "Get away from that vehicle, you hungry thing," Silas bellowed, his voice ragged from years of shouting over sea winds. The silent diver dropped its attempt on the door lock and turned, its body language shifting from cautious hunter to aggressive predator. It knew Silas. It knew the wrench. It knew the salt rounds. Silas, moving with surprising agility for a man his age, didn't try to fight. He knew that physical force was useless against the diver's chitinous armor. He rushed the truck, not the monster, and hammered the back window of Elias's cab with the wrench handle. "Kids, listen to me. It's Silas Vane. Unlock the doors and get out now." Caleb, shaking uncontrollably, finally found his motor control. He slammed the unlock button. Silas wrenched the driver's side door open, pulling Caleb out first. "Your mother and father," Silas started, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. The open door, the blood-slicked stones near the guardrail. His face hardened. He didn't need an explanation. They're in the water. We can't go after them. The lake takes all claims. Lila, still humming softly, extended her doll. He took Papa's toy, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. He wants doll next. Silas took Lila. He looked at the rag doll, seeing the dark silt and the nautical rope tied around its waist. He recognized the pattern. A ritual marking, a signature of the hunt. No, Silas grunted, pulling Caleb and Lila towards his tow truck. He wants the living. The doll is just the string on the package. The silent diver, seeing its prey escaping, finally moved. It didn't run. It slithered and bounded, its limbs extending and contracting like a deep-sea crustacean, crossing the distance in horrifying, soundless leaps. Silas shoved the children into his cab, barking, "Stay down! Don't look!" He slammed the door, the heavy metal providing the only barrier. He knew he didn't have time to get the winch cable hooked up. He had to stop the thing now. The diver reached the tow truck side. It was even taller than Silas had realized, standing nearly 7.5 feet, its hunched posture giving way to menacing height. His breathing was a faint, wet rattle like a broken aquarium pump. Silas raised the heavy monkey wrench. "Get back, deep crawler. You know the price." The creature, instead of attacking the front of the tow truck, circled to the passenger side where the children were, using the bulk of the rig as cover. It then performed an action of chilling, calculated malice. It slammed its long, spined forearm into the front tire of the tow truck. The force was incredible, but the intent was pure engineering. It knew that disabling the vehicle was the easiest way to regain its prey. The rubber exploded with a dull, wet sound. The truck lurched violently, and the engine shrieked in protest. Silas cursed, realizing he was now trapped, his tow rig crippled. He spun around, the wrench raised high, but the diver was too fast. It closed the distance, not aiming for his head, but for his neck. The creature's right arm, the one that wasn't a cluster of chitinous claws, was tipped with a single, long, needle-sharp bone spur, like a massive organic marlin spike. It lunged, not to tear, but to puncture and drain. Silas roared, twisting his body. The bone spur missed his jugular by an inch, instead tearing a long, deep gash across the side of his neck and shoulder. He felt a searing, bone-deep cold immediately set in, far worse than the laceration itself. He brought the wrench down with all his might, aiming for the creature's midsection. He heard the metallic clang of steel meeting armor, and the diver actually staggered back, letting out a sound. Not a scream, but a dry, rattling hiss of annoyance. Silas knew he had perhaps 30 seconds before the blood loss and the chilling effect of the creature's attack overwhelmed him. He staggered to his shotgun, fighting the dizziness. He ripped the weapon from its mount, feeling the familiar, reassuring weight of the stock against his shoulder. The diver, realizing the wrench was a serious deterrent, retreated to the Thorns' dead pickup, where the children remained trapped in the cab. It began using its bone spur to pry at the door frame, intending to rip the door off its hinges. "No, you don't," Silas yelled, raising the shotgun. He took careful aim, not for the body, but for the diver's face, hoping to blind it. Before he could pull the trigger, the air was filled with a sudden, overwhelming flash of red and blue light, cutting violently through the heavy fog. The sound of a powerful, throaty siren wailed down the spine trail. It was Sheriff Gareth Blackwood. The police cruiser skidded to a stop right behind Silas's crippled tow truck. The sheriff, a man whose weary face wore the weight of Blackwood Inlet secrets, burst out of his vehicle, his own pump-action shotgun already shouldered. Gareth didn't waste time on questions or warnings. He saw the 8-foot, glistening shadow attempting to dismantle the Thorn pickup, and he saw Silas, bleeding profusely, clutching a wrench. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "Get the kids out, Silas. I'll pin it," Gareth screamed over the siren. The silent diver turned one last time, its wide, needle-toothed mouth gaping in frustration. It looked straight at the sheriff, at the red and blue flashing lights, at the uniform, at the man who represented the fragile order it enjoyed disrupting. Gareth fired. Boom! The shotgun blast was deafening. It hit the diver's chest. But it wasn't the sound that mattered. It was the ammunition. The impact of the heavy salt rock rounds, ancient protection against water spirits and dark things, sent a visible shockwave through the creature's translucent body. It didn't bleed. It vaporized where the salt struck it, leaving behind patches of steaming, black brine. The creature shrieked, a high, unnatural sound like steel scraping wet glass, and staggered backward, its movements now clumsy and pained. Gareth fired again, aiming at the creature's legs. Boom! More vaporized flesh and a louder shriek of raw agony. The silent diver knew when the hunt was over. It abandoned the thorn pickup and, with an incredibly fast, panicked maneuver, vaulted the guardrail and plunged into the abyss lake. There was a sound of rushing water, a large splash, and then only the silence of the heavy, rolling fog. Gareth didn't lower his weapon. He stood guard for a full minute, waiting, listening. When he was certain the diver wouldn't immediately return, he lowered the smoking barrel. He walked over to Silas, who was leaning heavily against his tow truck, his neck and shoulders slick with dark, coppery blood. Silas, you hit. It missed the pipe, Gareth, Silas gasped, referring to his jugular. But I'm cold. That thing. It leaves a chill. Gareth didn't respond to the chill comment. He already knew. He opened the cab of Elias's truck and looked at the two terrified children. Caleb was wide-eyed, clutching the flashlight. Lila was calm, still holding her doll. Are you hurt, kids? Gareth asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Caleb shook his head, then pointed at the guardrail. They took Papa and Mama. They're in the lake. Gareth looked at the gash in the road, the drag marks, the silence of the abyss. He looked back at Lila. She lifted the empty-eyed doll, turning it toward him. He likes the song, Sheriff? Lila whispered, her eyes fixed on his. He told me he wants us all. Down where the dark is long and deep. Gareth took the doll from her hands. He saw the black silt, the nautical rope. He looked at Silas, who was swaying but still conscious. We have to go, Silas, Gareth said, his voice flat. Right now. Before the tide changes and it comes back with company. He put the children in the back of his patrol car, ignoring the gruesome scene. He looked one last time at the spine trail, at the algae snare, the crippled pickup, and the gaping drop where the thorns vanished. He didn't just stop your engine, Elias, Gareth muttered to the empty fog. He set the goddamn table. The drive back to Blackwood Inlet was a blur of flashing red and blue lights, the only things that seemed to possess any urgency in the dead, fog-choked town. Sheriff Gareth Blackwood drove fast but carefully, his focus split between the winding road and the shattered man slumped in the passenger seat. Silas' vein was fading. The wound on his neck, though hastily wrapped in a handkerchief, pulsed with a dark, oily sheen. But it wasn't the blood loss that worried Gareth. It was the cold. Silas was shivering violently, teeth chattering despite the patrol car's heater blasting on full. It's the water in him, Gareth, Silas wheezed, his voice thin as old parchment. It always leaves a piece of the abyss behind. The cold, it goes straight to the bone. It's how it claims you, even if you survive. Gareth didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. In the back, Caleb Thorne, the 10-year-old, sat rigidly upright, clutching the heavy flashlight his father had left behind. He was crying silently, huge, hot tears tracking paths down his dusty cheeks. Lila, however, was quiet, watching the rhythmic flash of the emergency lights bounce off the inside of the cabin. She had Gareth's shotgun shell bag, the one containing the specialized salt rock rounds, resting in her lap like a security blanket. Gareth knew he couldn't take them to the local clinic. The questions would start, and the local nurse, Mrs. Healy, was too much of a gossip. He drove straight to the only place in Blackwood Inlet with iron bars and a working phone line. The sheriff's substation. The substation was a squat, concrete bunker built in the 1950s. More of a strong room than an office, located 3 blocks from the coastline. It had thick walls, no windows on the ground floor, and a single reinforced steel door. A grim fortress against the chaos of the outside world. He led them inside, past the cramped dispatch desk and into the back room. A small, sterile space with a cot, a medical kit, and a lockable door. He applied a thick, military-issue coagulant to Silas's wound, tying it down with a pressure bandage. "You rest here, Silas. Don't move. I'll call the state patrol, but I'll tell them it was a poaching incident. Not this." Gareth knew the lie was useless, but it bought him time. Silas nodded weakly. He looked at Caleb, then Lila. "The diver is smart, Caleb. It's a fisherman. It set the snare on the spine trail because it knew the road was the only way out. It'll assume we went straight home or to the station. You two stay quiet. It hunts by listening to the heart." Gareth ushered the children into the main office. He turned on the harsh fluorescent lights, which made the peeling paint and cluttered files look even grimmer. "Caleb, Lila, I need you two to sit right here." He pointed to a small, padded bench built against the wall, next to the heavy front door. "I have to make some calls. Do not touch anything, and do not make a sound." As Gareth picked up the ancient, rotary dial phone, Lila spoke, her small voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "He saw the picture, Sheriff." Gareth froze, his finger hovering over the dial. "What picture, Lila?" "The one Mama drew. It was on the fridge. It showed the lake and the empty house." Lila traced a pattern on the shotgun shell bag. But he put a new drawing on the door. Caleb, who had been rocking back and forth in shock, suddenly looked up, horrified. "The letter. The one Mama got. It wasn't a prank, Sheriff." Lila said it was a map. Gareth put the phone down gently. He walked toward Lila, kneeling so they were at eye level. "Lila, I need you to be very brave. What did the diver put on the door?" Lila reached for a worn notepad and a dull pencil Gareth kept on the desk. She drew with a child's simple, heavy strokes. A circle with 3 wavy lines, the lake, 2 tiny, stick figures floating, Elias and Seraphina, and a crude arrow pointing not to the substation, but away from it, toward a singular structure she drew as a square with a chimney. Then she added a chilling detail. She drew the inverted trident symbol, the one on Seraphina's parchment, and beneath it, she drew what looked like a fish hook. On the hook she placed a small, simple heart. "It's not a map away from here, Sheriff," Caleb whispered, translating the terror he now understood. "It's a map to the next place it's going to hunt." Lila looked up, her expression utterly detached. "He didn't take them back to the water to eat them, Sheriff. He took them to change them. That's what he told me through Doll. He's taking them to the Hollow Hearth." Gareth Blackwood knew the name. The Hollow Hearth was local slang for the ruins of the original Blackwood settlement, an abandoned, half-sunken stone foundation deep within the dense forest, where the oldest, darkest rituals of the town were rumored to have taken place before the town was even incorporated. "He told you, Lila?" Gareth asked, his voice shaking slightly. Lila nodded, then pointed to the heart on the drawing. "He gave Mama a gift, too. He pressed it on the window." Caleb finished the terrible sentence for her. "It was a human heart, Sheriff. It was still moving." The realization hit Gareth with the force of a tidal wave. The diver wasn't just a monster. It was an intellectual, ritualistic entity. It had used the stolen heart to mark its intent and the hearth as its next ritual site. It was playing a game of calculated, cruel horror. Gareth stood up, his face grim. He had to assume the diver's map meant it was going after anyone connected to the Thorns who didn't hide at the station. He looked at the windowless concrete walls. They were safer here for now, but not for long. Gareth made the calls. State Patrol was 3 hours away. He had 20 rounds of salt shot left. He had a crippled, bleeding Silas in the back. And he had 2 children who were the focus of a deeply intelligent, monstrous hunt. He hung up, his hands trembling. He looked at the sturdy steel front door. Could hold a man, but could it hold a creature that could pry apart the steel frame of a pickup? Suddenly, Caleb jumped up, flashlight in hand. "The truck. My dad's truck. It had the emergency flare box. We can go back and get the flares. We can fire them at the diver." Gareth shook his head. The spine trail is a death trap, son. We're not going back. But the flares are the only thing that can hurt it, Caleb insisted, driven by a 10-year-old's need to do something. The flare box is always under the driver's seat. I saw him pack it. Before Gareth could stop him, Lila, her face still expressionless, walked to the main desk and stood beside the heavy front door. She reached up and touched the cool steel. He's here now, Sheriff, she said, her voice barely audible. He's not waiting for the hearth. He's outside. A sudden, jarring sound confirmed her claim. It was a loud, sharp scrap, like a massive rake being dragged across the concrete just outside the front wall. The entire substation vibrated, and the fluorescent lights above flickered again, mimicking the engine death on the spine trail. The silent diver hadn't gone back to the lake. It had followed them, moving silently through the deep fog of the town itself. It hadn't come for a siege. It had come for a surgical breach. Gareth rushed to the front door, pulling his shotgun from the rack. He knew the diver wouldn't come through the door. It was too reinforced. It would try to get through the roof or a ventilation shaft, the weak points of the building. Scrape, scrape. The sound moved, traveling across the roof, and then down the adjacent wall, where the single, large air vent for the heating unit was located. Stay back, kids, Gareth yelled, aiming the shotgun at the ceiling. He heard the sound of heavy metal protesting. The diver wasn't trying to tear the vent off. It was using its large, clawed hands to slowly, deliberately bend the thick metal grill inwards. Screech, pop. The sound was agonizingly slow, a controlled destruction designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Caleb scrambled to Silas's room, locking the door behind him. Silas was too weak to fight. Lila, however, did something utterly unexpected. She walked to the large, empty whiteboard Gareth used for scheduling and picked up a red marker. She began drawing the inverted trident over and over, rapidly, filling the entire board with the creature's chilling mark. Gareth was distracted by the metallic shriek from the vent. He fired a quick, warning shot at the ceiling above the vent. Boom! The salt rounds blasted through the plaster, creating a plume of dust. The shrieking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Gareth waited, breathing heavily. He realized the fatal mistake he had made. He had brought the children to the only building in town that was so easily identified and isolated. A fortress for men, but a simple tin can for the deep crawler. Then, from outside the wall, a new sound emerged. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the distinct sound of Seraphina's voice, calling out, weak and watery. Elias, Caleb, why did you leave me? It's so cold out here. The siren's call. The silent diver was using its praise voice to lure the remaining family members out. The horror was now complete. Physical attack, ritualistic taunt, and psychological warfare. Caleb, locked in the back room with Silas, heard the voice and let out a choked cry. Mama! He scrambled for the door handle. Lila, still at the whiteboard, turned to the door. She didn't look at Gareth. She looked at the door handle, which was visibly wobbling. He's not finished, Sheriff, Lila said, her eyes fixed on the moving handle. He has a piece of Papa, too. He showed me. As the handle turned, Gareth rushed to the door, placing his shoulder against the heavy wood, trying to hold it shut against the terrifying, unseen force on the other side. Silas, hold your door. I'm stuck. He knew the door wouldn't hold. The diver knew they were in here, and it would not stop until the hunt was complete. The heavy wooden door to the back room, where Silas Vane and Caleb Thorne were hiding, began to shudder violently. The brass knob rattled, twisting back and forth with impossible force, accompanied by Seraphina's distorted, watery voice pleading from the hallway. Caleb, the water is warm now. Come to Mama. Sheriff Gareth Blackwood leaned his full weight against the outer door, aiming his shotgun at the inner wall, desperate to find the exact point of entry. He knew the diver was employing two tactics simultaneously: psychological torture through the voice lure, and brute force combined with a sickening finesse to bypass the locks. Lila's earlier warning. He has a piece of Papa, too, screamed in his mind. The creature was using Elias's strength, his memories, or perhaps an organ taken from him, to operate the locking mechanism. "Silas, how are you doing back there?" Gareth yelled, his voice strained. From the back room, Silas Vane, despite the crippling cold seeping from his neck wound, found a sliver of his old sailor's strength. He had crawled to the back wall and was using a heavy metal file cabinet as a barricade against the inner door. "I'm cold, Gareth, but I'm holding. That thing is trying to unhinge the latch, not break the door. It's too damn smart." Lila, seeing Gareth's distraction, pointed the red marker at the air vent, which was now loudly groaning as the diver succeeded in bending the thick metal grill open. A long, thin, bone-tipped finger, pale and glistening with moisture, snaked through the gap, blindly searching. "He's getting in the roof, Sheriff," Lila stated calmly. "But he doesn't like the light that burns. Only the light that is deep. The light that burns." Caleb's desperate plea for the emergency flares echoed in Gareth's mind. Flares, intense, chemical combustion, the opposite of the cold, dark, abyssal water. Gareth made a split-second decision. Caleb was right. "We need the flares. Lila, stay right here. Don't look at the door." He ripped his shoulder away from the heavy wooden door, knowing it would only buy them a few more seconds. He slammed his shotgun against the wall nearest the vent opening, reloading the last 3 salt rounds. He didn't aim at the opening. He aimed at the ceiling above it, hoping to collapse plaster and concrete onto the exposed limb. Boom! The shotgun roared. The plaster exploded, but the bone finger merely retracted slightly, waiting. Gareth wheeled around to the shattered back room door. "Silas, I'm going for the flares. Get the kids and drive. State Patrol is 3 hours out, but the diver is inside our perimeter." "You're mad, Gareth. It'll track the car." Silas coughed, the movement sending spasms through his chilled body. "It's already tracking the children, Silas. It won't stop. I have to break the ritual. I have to get the flares and burn the map at the hollow hearth. You take the kids and run south. Don't stop until you hit the city limits." Gareth knew the truth. Silas was the diversion. Silas and his tow truck, however crippled, were the only things that might hold the diver's interest long enough for Gareth to execute the one, desperate plan born from Lila's horrifying foresight. He dashed toward his patrol car, throwing the driver's side door open. The sirens and lights were still flashing, a maddening, useless chaos in the fog. Silas heard the sheriff's cruiser roar away. He heard the sound of the diver's body dropping from the substation roof, a wet, sickening thud, as it realized its prey was mobile. Silas forced himself onto his feet, the world swimming. He was leaving the kids, but he knew Gareth's crazy plan was the only one that made sense. He grabbed Caleb and Lila, pulling them from the now silent office. "Caleb, Lila, we're going to the tow truck. Get down low. We're driving straight at the fog." They piled into the cab of Silas's rust bucket rig. Silas slammed the door shut and cranked the ignition. The massive diesel engine roared to life, shaking off the damage. The front tire was blown, making the truck limp and pull heavily, but it moved. "Where is he, Lila?" Silas demanded, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. Lila, clutching her empty-eyed doll, pointed to the road behind them. "He's running after the sheriff, Silas. He wants the heart. He wants to know why Sheriff Gareth knows his name." Silas floored the accelerator, sending the massive truck lurching southward, the heavy metal grating against the asphalt where the tire should have been. The sound was deafening, a desperate, flawed engine trying to outrun a silent, perfect hunter. Meanwhile, Gareth Blackwood drove his cruiser back down the fog-choked streets of Blackwood Inlet, a silent prayer of apology to Silas and the children on his lips. He knew he was bait. He drove past the Thorn house, now dark and accusing, its windows like empty, staring eyes. He was looking for the map, the location on Lila's drawing, the hollow hearth. He found it 3 miles inland, deep within the Blackwood forest, down an overgrown track used only by loggers or perhaps something older. The hearth was a natural clearing dominated by the half-submerged stone ruins of a colonial-era foundation. At its center stood a rough, flat slab of black granite, an ancient altar. The scene was horrific. On the granite slab lay a grotesque tapestry woven from the same black algae, wet and shimmering. In the center of the tapestry, arranged in the chilling pattern of the inverted trident, were two items: a torn piece of heavy, khaki material, Elias's uniform fragment, and a single, white, calcified hand, severed just above the wrist. But the true horror was the noise. It wasn't Serafina's voice this time. It was a low, mournful, and rhythmic singing coming from the depths of the half-submerged foundation. It was the silent diver, but its voice was complex, chanting in a language that predated the settlement. A wet, guttural harmony. And it was being answered. From the dark, thick water filling the old foundation, two shapes emerged. They were vaguely human, but their limbs were too long, their skin too pale, their movements jerky and aquatic. They were Elias and Serafina, or what the diver was turning them into, diverlings, still recognizable, but animated by a terrifying new purpose. Their eyes were large, round, and black, and their mouths were beginning to stretch into that same needle-toothed grin. The silent diver itself stood guarding the altar, its back to Gareth, finishing its gruesome work. Gareth raised his shotgun. He knew he had to destroy the altar before the transformation was complete, before the thorns became permanent additions to the lake's predatory retinue. He raised the shotgun and aimed for the black granite slab. Boom! Boom! The salt rounds hit the altar with two sickening cracks. The granite, ancient and brittle, shattered. The black algae tapestry instantly curled and blackened, releasing a plume of caustic, burning steam. The effect was immediate. The chanting stopped. The two emerging diverlings, Elias and Serafina, froze, letting out a synchronized mechanical shriek. The silent diver whipped around, its face a mask of pure, intelligent fury. It screamed, a high, unnatural sound that hurt Gareth's ears, and lunged. Gareth backed up, reloading his last salt rounds, but he was too late. The diver covered the distance in two impossible bounds. It brought its bone-spurred arm up, not to strike, but to dismantle the weapon. The spur ripped through the wood stock of the shotgun, slicing it in half and sending the remaining salt rounds scattering uselessly into the dirt. Gareth was unarmed. The diver stood over him, its needle-toothed mouth gaping, inches from his face. The smell of mud and copper was overpowering. It looked into his eyes, the eyes of a man who knew the secrets of Blackwood Inlet. It didn't attack. Instead, it raised its pale, five-fingered claw, the one that still looked vaguely human, and gently stroked the silver star pinned to Gareth's chest. It spoke, not in Serafina's voice, but in a dry, rasping whisper that sounded like sand being poured over stone. You should have kept the pact, Blackwood. Just then, a blinding, white-hot light filled the clearing. Caleb Thorne, driven by the memory of his father's survival guide, had convinced Silas to circle back and leave him near the hearth. He stood 20 yards away, his heavy flashlight in one hand and the emergency road flare from his father's truck in the other. He had struck it on a rock, and the magnesium was burning with a terrifying, sputtering intensity. Caleb threw the burning flare with all his strength. The flare hit the silent diver in its shoulder. The effect was devastating. The creature was immune to cold, immune to blunt force, and resistant to bullets. But the intense chemical heat and light instantly caused its translucent, gelatinous skin to react violently. Where the flare struck, the skin didn't burn or bleed. It instantly boiled, turning the creature's tissues into a bubbling, noxious green-black goo. The silent diver let out a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. A wet, metallic shriek that rose to an impossible pitch. It recoiled violently from Gareth and tore the flare from its shoulder, throwing it into the deep foundation water where it instantly sputtered out. The creature didn't attempt to pursue Caleb or finish Gareth. The hunt was broken. The ritual was ruined. Its focus shifted entirely to the immediate, agonizing injury. With a final, desperate heave, The diver lunged back toward the deepest part of the foundation, where its two half-changed victims, Elias and Serafina, had collapsed back into the black water. It disappeared beneath the surface, leaving behind only the sulfurous smell of the burnt flare and a dark, steaming puddle of its own biological residue. Gareth found Caleb trembling but alive. He quickly dragged the boy back to the cruiser. They drove in silence back to the town limits, where Silas Vane, pale but stable, was waiting in his limping tow truck, Lila asleep in his arms. Gareth drove the two children south, away from Blackwood Inlet, while Silas stayed behind to meet the state patrol, ready with the prepared lie about a poaching ring and a botched investigation. The secret of the Abyss Lake would remain intact, protected not by a pact, but by sheer necessary terror. As they reached the first highway marker, Lila woke up. She sat up straight in the back seat, staring at the empty-eyed doll resting on the console. Caleb turned to comfort her, his face streaked with tears and dirt. Lila turned to her brother, her eyes wide, but carrying a terrible light. She whispered, her voice almost joyful, "He didn't get doll, Caleb, but he knows all the songs now, and he likes the one Mama used to sing. He wants us all, still, down where the dark is long and deep. He just needs a little more time." Gareth didn't look in the mirror. He just pressed the accelerator harder, driving the children of Blackwood Inlet toward a city they would never be able to truly call home. The hunt was over, but the wait had just begun.